Singapore Airlines is one of the most prominent airline brands in all of Asia. It is a name that is synonymous to Singapore's economic success. As of the time of writing, Singapore Airlines is also one of the most valuable airline companies globally. It has a market capitalization, which is also known as its valuation, to stand at over $14.4 billion, making it the seventh most valuable airline company globally, just behind companies like Delta Airlines, Ryanair, and Air China. It is also Singapore's eighth most valuable company, behind the country's famous banks and technology companies. But most people don't really understand how much an airline makes from their sales. Well, it's pretty obvious, right? When you purchase the economy ticket from one country to another, it's likely going to fall into the pockets of Singapore Airlines. But it's far more complicated than that. Singapore Airlines has to take into consideration several considerations like the aircraft that they purchased, the labor that they pay, which are basically the cabin crews and pilots. They also have to think about the maintenance and operation of an aircraft, which isn't really cheap. There's a lot of expenses that go into running an airline, and we'll break it down one by one. Let's first start with the overall performance of Singapore Airlines. Singapore Airlines has been performing relatively well over the past few years. This is a graph of Singapore Airlines' financial statements. Here we can see the company's revenues per year. Revenue is, in simple terms, what the company gets after selling their products or services. In Singapore Airlines' case, most likely from their airline operations like selling seats in their aircrafts. Over the past few years, it is evident that Singapore Airlines has been consistent in their sales. The only lagging years were due to the COVID-19 pandemic, which shut down the global movement of people. Despite that, Singapore Airlines was still positioned properly, as evident by its profits. Every year since 2015, Singapore Airlines was able to report profit after profit, although obviously not a lot. It was only recently, in the last 2 financial years, that Singapore Airlines made a lot of money. This is due to the rebound of travel demand and the rising cost of air travel, which helped Singapore Airlines make a lot of money. Now that we have a clear understanding of Singapore Airlines' overall performance, let's talk about the dynamics of an airline. How do they actually make money? As obvious as it is from selling their seats, Singapore Airlines sells different seats in an aircraft: economy, premium economy, and business class. In some aircrafts, however, they have what is known as first class and suites, which are available in their A380 and Boeing 777. But how much do they really make from each sale of seats? Well, it varies. Airline tickets tend to fluctuate based on demand and supply, booking times, competitor pricing, season trends, days of the week, and so on and so forth. Furthermore, Singapore Airlines doesn't really disclose detailed revenue figures segmented by specific cabin classes, such as economy, premium economy, and business. But it is commonly known that economy class tends to generate the highest passenger volume, thereby contributing significantly to total revenue. Premium cabins, such as business and premium economy, typically offer higher yields per passenger, enhancing profitability despite lower passenger numbers. For a base estimate, let's just see how much Singapore Airlines makes. Let's first start with their first class. Here's a price graph from Google Flights flying round trip from Singapore to New York. On average, we are seeing about $16,000, with sometimes fluctuating to as much as $25,000. Prices are relatively stable at this trend regardless of the month. In a Boeing 777 Singapore Airlines seat map, there are about 4 of these seats. Of course, if we assume that 4 of these seats are sold every flight, that'll generate over $64,000 in revenue. But most likely than not, it's probably booked less often. Now, on top of the first class, there's also the business class. There are about 48 business class seats on the very same plane, which again, according to Google Flights, tend to cost $6,000, but at times rising to over $10,000. Finally, for premium and economy, the prices do drop further. For their premium economy, they have 28 seats, which averages at a cost of $3,200. For economy seats, it is far, far cheaper, of course, but their prices tend to differ on the plane itself and seasonally. On average, however, we are seeing about $1,500 to $3,000, which should put a base estimate of $2,000. There's also 184 seats for this aircraft flying to New York. Now, before we talk about how much revenue this one flight can generate, it is first important to understand a concept called average load factor. This simply means that, on average, what percentage of seats on a given flight are filled with paying passengers. Airlines closely monitor this metric because it directly affects their profitability. A higher load factor means that more seats are occupied, helping the airline maximize its revenue for each flight. For example, if an airline has an average load factor of 80%, it means that on most flights, 80% of the available seats are filled with paying customers. For the financial year of 2023-24, Singapore Airlines said that they carried around 36.4 million passengers, achieving an average load factor of 88%. On a ballpark estimate, that means this one flight going from Singapore to New York can generate revenues of about $809,600 if fully booked at the prices we've discussed. But, applying the 88% load factor, we should adjust this estimate to better reflect actual passenger occupancy. With 88% of the seats occupied, the revenue would be around $712,448 for a round trip. This is a rough approximation, but it gives a sense of the revenue potential of one flight from Singapore to New York on the Boeing 777. Now, you have to factor a lot in this calculation. We have to talk about the expenses involved in flying this aircraft. The first is the aircraft that they are sitting on. A Boeing 777-300ER has a list price of approximately $375 million. Then, there's also the depreciation of an aircraft. Airlines typically depreciate aircraft over 20 to 25 years. For a $375 million aircraft over 25 years, this results in an annual depreciation expense of $15 million, or about $41,090 per day. Another significant cost is fuel. Fuel prices fluctuate. On a base price, jet fuel is about $600 per metric ton, and a Boeing 777-300ER consumes approximately 7.2 metric tons of fuel per hour. For a 19-hour trip between Singapore and New York, this totals about 136.8 metric tons. The entire round trip would approximately cost $164,160. Then there's also the crew and staffing cost. Again, just for a base estimate, as salaries may differ from flight to flight, and even crew to crew. For this flight, however, we'll be taking in 4 pilots, because a long-haul flight like this typically needs a minimum of that. Assuming an average annual salary of $150,000 per pilot, the cost per flight is approximately $2,740. Then, typically about 12 cabin crew members are needed. With an average annual salary of $40,000, the cost per flight is about $1,315. Another important factor to take into consideration is maintenance and repairs, which is estimated to be $1,000 per flight hour. And on a 19-hour flight, it will be over $19,000. Then there's also major overhauls, which occur approximately every 20,000 flight hours, costing around $6 million. This translates to about $300 per flight hour, or $5,700 for the round trip. the maintenance cost sums to about $24,700 per flight. But on a round trip, this doubles. There's also airport fees and navigation charges. Major airports like Changi and JFK charge around $10,000 combined per round trip. Airlines also pay fees to air traffic control agencies, estimated at $5,000 for this route. This gives us an approximate of $15,000 per flight, or $30,000 for the round trip. There are also other operational costs, like providing meals and beverages, which can cost about $50 per passenger. For 268 passengers, 88% load factor of 300 seats, this totals $13,400. There's also services such as baggage handling and gate operations that can cost around $5,000 per flight. Other costs, including insurance, can be an additional $19,200 per flight. Summing these expenses, the total operating cost for a round trip from Singapore to New York is approximately $319,315. Considering our earlier revenue estimate of $712,448 for an 88% load factor, Singapore Airlines' estimated net profit for this particular round trip would be around $393,133. But this, of course, should just be a calculation of many. We haven't added factors like unexpected maintenance issues, fluctuating fuel prices, or seasonal variations that could impact both revenue and costs. Further, there are also other additional revenue streams, like the KrisFlyer loyalty program and partnerships. Then there's also cargo operations, and in-flight shopping and additional services. But for simplicity, this is what you get. But anyway, do let us know what you think. Thanks for watching.